Your net income has exceeded your goal for the last 3 years. I think you need a bigger goal. The truth is she didn't know, which is just mind-blowing when you think about that. If you're a bookkeeper, right, or you're a CPA or that's what you do for a living, is you look at those things like, okay, that's what you made. It's like not a big deal. But sometimes clients don't understand it.
You're listening to The Successful Bookkeeper with your host, Michael Palmer. Listen each week as inspiring guests share their secrets of success to help you increase your confidence, work smarter, and build a business you love. This episode of The Successful Bookkeeper is brought to you by PureBookkeeping.com, the proven system to grow your bookkeeping business.
Welcome back to the Successful Bookkeeper Podcast. I am your host, Michael Palmer, and today's show is going to be a good one. Our guest has worked with numbers for over 20 years, analyzing both the data and the bigger story, running his own businesses and helping others make sense out of their numbers. He's a business/decision-making analyst and advisor, and he's here to help you. Noah Martin, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you, Michael. I'm thrilled to be here. I love getting to talk to people who actually know something about numbers. Like a lot of people I talk to are the people who don't know anything about numbers. So it's a thrill to be able to talk to the other side a little more.
Well, I'm sure you do a lot of talking because there's a lot of people that don't know their numbers. And I mean, your website, I mean, it says it all. Know your numbers with Noah. I mean, you're the numbers guy. So I think it's exciting to have you on the podcast and to actually tell your story and as well help our listeners help their clients, their small businesses be inspired perhaps to know their numbers better.
Well, Michael, my wife and I started a business back in 2007. And before that, I worked for large insurance companies, Aetna, United Healthcare, and other large entities. And then I worked for consulting companies. And so for a long time, I spent my entire life arguing about prices. For about 15 years, I would say higher. And then for about 5 years, I said lower. That was my whole job. But I had fantastic amounts of information. And when I went and moved into the place where I was running a small business with my wife instead of working in these enterprise places, what I found is the information just wasn't there a lot of the time. And I had to figure that out because I did not understand, how do small businesses actually make their decisions if they don't know what's going on? And I spent about 10 years trying to just figure that out for myself in the small business I run with Christine. And it was amazing to find out that it's actually not that hard, but most things aren't set up to do it. And people don't know, i.e. small business owners don't know the questions to ask. Because the thing is bookkeepers are amazing because they can tell you the story of what's happening. And the thing is that what most small business owners want to do is they want to predict the future. And as the old saying goes, those who do not understand the past are doomed to repeat it. So you actually have to know what happened if you're going to take honestly, about half my time in this business is essentially budgeting and reconciling, right? That's basically what I help people do, is because at the beginning of the year, often we spend a lot of time sort of guessing what we think is going to happen this next year. And people are actually okay at guessing, sort of what they think is going to happen on the revenue side, but they're kind of terrible at understanding how that translates into how much money they actually get. Like, it's amazing how that is separate. And it takes a long time to just convince them that it's possible to know what happens in their business. And I think that's really the most important thing I want you guys to know is, as bookkeepers, it's actually your job to help them understand what happened. And oftentimes you give them something like a P&L and they don't actually know what it means. Even though it's so simple when you look at it, if you know what it is, most clients actually don't know what they are. It's this magical mystery that's happening outside of them that they don't understand. The other day, I had a beautiful client, a brilliant person who is an artist who does a lot of stuff in Photoshop. I don't know if you've ever been into Photoshop, but I'll tell you, it scares the bejesus out of me. It is impossible to understand all of the different layers and maths and the this and the that. And she is expert at all of that stuff. It's way more complicated to me than reading a P&L. But it took me an hour to walk her through, hey, this is what your P&L is saying. Because she came to me and said, here's my goal. And I looked at her last 3 years of your P&L and I go, you've been hitting that goal for 3 years. Do you know that? And she was like, no. I'm like, well, there's this number on the bottom of the sheet. It says this is what you did. It's the net income. Your net income has exceeded your goal for the last 3 years. I think you need a bigger goal. The truth is she didn't know, which is just mind-blowing when you think about that. If you're a bookkeeper, right, or you're a CPA or that's what you do for a living, is you look at those things like, okay, that's what you made. It's like not a big deal. But sometimes
Amazing.
clients don't understand it.
Probably more often than not. And so I'm curious, when you have clients, are they all, I mean, your title of your website is Know Your Numbers with Noah. I mean, obviously they know coming to you that's likely something about it. But do you ever get resistance, or do people even have a barrier to understanding why they should know their numbers?
Well, I think yeah, all the time. And the truth is I have to enroll them in the idea that they can no longer run their business at a gut level. Most businesses are sort of, especially, I work mostly with service businesses, cost of goods businesses, item businesses where you're building physical things are a little different in this way, because if you have a cost of goods, you kind of have to understand it, although there are some exceptions to that, of course. The truth is I have to enroll them in the idea that they have to be more comfortable with their numbers so they can understand, can I hire someone else to help me do some of the stuff I don't want to do? Can I afford to take this vacation I want to do? Can I buy the new car? Like, they have to know what's going on in their numbers so they can make these decisions and not make it blindly. The resistance is sometimes the news is not good. Sometimes, this last year, pretty tough for most businesses, right? It's not been the year in which everyone had a trending upline on both their revenue and their profit, right? Like, that's not what happened. The truth is the books aren't what makes that true. What makes it true is that it's true. And you have to sort of move past some of that resistance of, what if I look at it, I have to acknowledge it, I have to deal with it. So yes, absolutely, people have that resistance. And the idea is you have to enroll them in the idea is if you understand these things, you can make great decisions that can help you create what you want.
That's critical. And I like that you brought up enroll. It's often people in this industry, and well, in any industry, they're selling what they know. It's like hey, here's your numbers. I'm going to help you know your numbers. I'm going to, get you cleared up. I'm going to make sure everything's organized. I mean, that's not what they want. What they want is they want what they want. And you just said, if you help them look at the truth, get the clarity, and know what's going on, you can design the business, build the business to deliver on what you want, and get them thinking about that. It's a whole different conversation than just saying, look, I'm going to go get this done for you.
Well, and I think the thing that for your bookkeepers out there, and to some extent your CPAs too, the thing you want to really help them understand is, what are the decisions that you have coming up? And is this information system we call books designed to tell you what you need to know? Oftentimes, a small business owner knows what they sell that sells the most. But what they don't know is, does that actually make money? Or is my money actually made somewhere else? Because the top line revenue spot is not always the place where you actually make money. Like, you can spend a lot of energy selling the thing that doesn't make you money, and that makes you worse off. So, in the grocery business, they call those loss leaders, right? There's all kinds of things that you sell milk for less than its actual cost so that people come in and buy eggs, right? They do this all the time. Now, you don't necessarily want to push more and more milk. You want to actually get more and more eggs. And most small businesses are doing that only at a gut level. They don't have a connection inside of themselves to say, oh, it's product C that is really the thing that is generating the revenue or generating the income. even if the revenue is being generated somewhere else, and finding that balance so they can make good decisions about it, because oftentimes people are focusing in the wrong place. So the message I want bookkeepers to really take in is ask them, what are the decisions you need to make in the near term or even the long term that you're trying to understand, so we can design your books so that you have that.
It's amazing. And I like the way you've positioned the bookkeeping system, an information system. And what a great question. Is your information system, or your what we call the bookkeeping system, is it designed to tell you what you need to know in order to get what you want? I mean, it's fantastic. And so what are the decisions? These are great questions in that exploratory conversation, which right away, I mean, when you're talking, I can imagine a prospective bookkeeping client, you start with this is going to open up a whole new dialogue, a whole new conversation, which will take it in a different direction that I would think many bookkeepers would find pleasing, because they would literally be building trust. They would be building confidence with that prospective client, and it would lead to a bigger, better opportunity for them.
Well, so information always costs money. I mean, like, that's the truth of it. And so most small businesses who have a bookkeeper, right, if they're not doing it themselves, are actually investing not an insignificant amount of money just to get the books done so they can do their taxes. The way most small business people think about it, especially if you're in the smaller half of the small business, is they think of bookkeeping as the thing I do so I pay the right amount of tax. And that is only way they think about it. They don't actually think of it as this information system that helps them run their business. They think that happens outside of the books. And I encourage them to think of, listen, if I'm paying to have this information constantly updated, maybe I should use it. Like, that's just like a mind-blowing thing for a lot of entrepreneurs. Like, oh, there's information I could use to make my decision, and maybe I need to pay a little extra to add this element to my book so that I am tying. This is another really key thing. Everyone who owns a business should be tying expenses to revenue as best as they can, so that you know, what does it really cost me to create the widget or to deliver the widget or whatever you're doing. Like, just because you can set up books in which all you know is what happened to the top and the bottom line. It's actually sometimes happens, and oftentimes I come and I look at that and I say, okay, that's not good enough. We have to go back to your bookkeeper and say, this is what I really need. And I spend a lot of my time essentially doing data cleanup on the old information so we can guess about what we want to do next. But then I say, but unless you want to pay me to do data cleanup all the time, which is my least favorite part of the job, you need to ask your bookkeeper to do it a little differently so that you actually have the information you need. And you know what? Bookkeepers get to charge you more money for that. So it's valuable. It's more valuable than that expense. And that's the thing where the enrollment comes in. That's where the idea of, what's the decision you need to make, and do you have the information on an ongoing basis to make it?
Wonderful. And when you're working with a particular client, is there a formula that you take for analyzing those numbers?
Well, I guess I don't know if there's a formula. Basically, if you have several clients in the same space, you can sort of essentially say, relative to others that I have, this is good or bad on the particular topic. So, profit and expenses and what you have to pay for people is all very industry specific. And because you don't want to be sharing one person's information with the other, like my profit margin is this, there's profit margin that, you can't really do that. But you can say, when I look at my overall client base, this is a high or low number on those things. So I don't necessarily have a specific formula per se, but what I can do is then say, this is what usually the thing most of the time that works for small businesses is, this is how it looks relative to the previous period. And that's a thing that's in most bookkeeping software, certainly in QuickBooks and most bookkeeping software. There's the ability to look at it. Hey, what was this like in the previous period? Is it good? Is it bad? Is it improving or is it getting better or worse? Like, let's just be really direct about that. But there isn't necessarily a formula as much as there is let's look at what the numbers are telling you and see what it looks like relative to other periods. If I have some sense of a particular cost or a specific margin on something, I can talk about that. and say, this seems high, it seems low. You should talk to this vendor and see if you can get a better deal. But that's not necessarily a formula as much as a feel, as much as anything else, or at least a relative to other people I know who are doing similar things.
Yeah, it would sound, I mean, when you're based on, what are the decisions you need to make in your business, you're helping them maybe even understand what those questions need to be as you go through their books, look at their numbers, understand what that looks like, and feed off of them. Like, does this look right? Does this look like you want? And often, I would think, as you said, many people avoid even taking a look at this for fear of maybe the information is not what they want to see. Many people are not looking at it. So even spending the time and, compartmentalizing that exercise to sit down and actually do a deep dive is part of the value and part of that discovery of finding what's valuable and knowing those numbers.
Well, and for people who do things like what I do, and so either a small business does it themselves or they hire someone like me to do it, which is sort of say, hey, what do we think is happening next year? How much is increasing the revenue going to cost me? And then in that I have to decide what's the risk in it. So I have a client who recently came back to me and said, I will note this is in the time of the corona, right? So there's their business took a big dip, and now they're forecasting the next year. And they came back to me with the initial forecast, and it says essentially they're going to make 5 times as much income in the first 5 months of 2021 than they did in the last 2 years, in either of the last 2 years. And I'm like, well, how are you doing that? I don't really understand. Like, is there some magic genie you have? Are you advertising? What are you doing? So what are the expenses associating with expanding this income? And some of it's their energy, and they have to decide whether they really want to spend all their time marketing or if they're doing something else. And when I have good information about what happened in the previous year, I can say, okay, here's how it's different. Tell me what are you doing differently than you did last year that is going to allow this to happen? And that is a question most people aren't thinking about. They just sort of think, if I grow revenue, it's good. And it's sort of like, well, okay, growing revenue is generally good, but sometimes it costs you a lot of money to grow revenue. And what happens if it doesn't come through? So I spend, all this money on, Facebook ads or newspaper ads, if those still exist, and all those things. And now, what if it doesn't materialize? Is this an appropriate risk for where I am financially? Is actually a fantastic question, but you can't get to that unless I know what's happened in the past.
And remarkable. And, this is really advising them. And there's been for a very long time, this concept of moving to advisory, bookkeepers moving to advisory, doing some of the work that you're doing. And you're really outlining the work that you do as an advisor to them and some of the things that you do. You can't get there without good data.
Well, the best predictor of the future is often the past. It is not to say that it's a perfect predictor, right? Because it's not. Like, things change, and what you can look at is this is what has happened. And I generally advise my clients to not assume more than a 50% increase on anything, and to not set themselves up where they're advertising or they're whatever to generate more revenue and trying to double or triple their revenue. If they don't see a natural path to it. That not to try to force it, because oftentimes that creates as many problems as it solves. Now, having understanding of what the baseline is, so to understand what is 5 times, what is double, what is that, requires understanding what's happened, but also being able to look at it not just in a macro sense, but into a somewhat micro sense. What are the line items? What are the various either services or products or whatever that create this? And if you're building widgets, if I sell twice as many widgets, can I actually make twice as many widgets? I mean, you have to really think about that, because sometimes there's capacity issues too. And you have to know what's happened to have some sense of what might happen.
One of the key things you said in the emails that were going back and forth when we were having you on the show is, and we've mentioned it already today in the podcast, the power of information, having this information. And I think it's a shift in context, a shift in language for our bookkeeping listeners to take on themselves is, it's not about bookkeeping. It's about the information that comes from that bookkeeping. And as well, this line, your books are there to help you run your business, not just pay your taxes. Advisory is about the looking at the past and helping to understand the future, help them determine what are the questions they need to be asking, what is the pathway forward, and how bookkeeping can be an essential part of getting them there.
Well, and one of the powerful words they may think about adding to their vocabulary is narrative. If the people you're working with are not naturally numbers people, most people who are in business got into business because they wanted to do the thing they're good at. And for some of those people, the thing they're not good at is bookkeeping and numbers. Like, it's just not their talent. They have these other beautiful skills, and that's why they're valuable and they can sell the stuff they sell. You may have to start helping them understand the narrative of their profit and loss, the narrative of their cash flow. And sometimes the narrative is beautiful and rosy, and that's easy to talk about. And sometimes it's, here's the challenge of your narrative is, so some people I've known and some of my clients have taken, these EIDL and PPP loans and other loans to help sustain their business in a downtime, which is a totally appropriate and beautiful thing. But you have to be able to say, and are you managing that in a good way? And is that working for you? Because I have one client who's moved through a lot of a loan over the course of a year because they haven't adjusted their business and their lifestyle to the experience. Now, that's a challenging narrative to deliver to a client. I will just own that is not my favorite conversation I've ever had with a client, and you have to sort of think about how to say it in a gentle and beautiful way so they can see this is the trend you're on. And you have to decide, is that a trend I want to maintain? Do I have a way out of this trend? What do I want to do about it? Because at the end of the day, neither I nor bookkeepers is it their job to change the trend, but it is our job to help them understand the trend and understand the narrative of the trend. Because sometimes they don't really, they look at the numbers and it just kind of goes over their head. It goes past them. It's like they don't really even see it. So you have to say, okay, well, here's a narrative. I need you to understand this narrative so that you're making conscious and beautiful decisions.
I love that. And I think the bookkeepers that understand this and can help change the narrative, optimize the narrative, if you will, are going to be incredibly competitive in the marketplace. Because when you've altered the narrative for someone, you've changed their life, the way they look at the world.
Well, and we're all narrative-based beings. Even one of the things I've come to really believe is all decisions are actually emotional. It's just some people need more information to feel comfortable emotionally to make the leap. So even though the numbers are the information that allow them to intellectualize the decision, they actually need some emotional information. So that's where narrative comes in to help them step into that next place. And sometimes it means I have to tighten the buckle and I have to sort of remove some expenses, or I have to come up with a more aggressive plan to generate revenue or whatever that is. But they need that narrative of understanding, this is where this is leading, so they can do it. Now, the numbers themselves help them understand it. Maybe they feel better about stepping into that emotional decision, but it's actually still an emotional decision. And that's where a narrative can be incredibly powerful.
Agreed. Very exciting. And so with the work that you do and some of the clients, I'd love to hear about some of your favorite success stories of where this information and where you've helped change the narrative with your clients and what that's done for their business.
So I had a client who we could see a natural downturn in 2019. And because of that, we reduced expenses in several different ways. And we were able to sort of say, well, listen, we have some reasons to expect that revenue is not increasing because of some of our life choices or some of the ways in which we're going to go about going into the world. So let's taper back some of these expenses and let's be aggressive about saying that we're going to do this and not do that. And over the course of 19, that actually led to, even though there was a reduction in revenue, an increase in income. And then when 20 happens and there's an additional decrease in revenue, they were prepared and able to continue to shrink the expenses to meet that change. And we're able to maintain income even though revenue has gone down. So sometimes when you can see things coming, you can make great decisions to be able to do that. So that's one example of just how understanding the narrative. Oh, I'm making the decisions, and it actually prepares you for a next step you don't even know is coming. Because
exercising the muscle, right? It's like you're getting, you have to do it a little. Even if you do a push-up a day, you do that for a while. You're able to do, if you needed to, you could do 4 or 5 if you needed to, right? Whereas if you had to jump in all of a sudden, just do it from never having done one for a year, you're going to feel that. So you're literally exercising the muscle of knowing the numbers and being able to dial in, dial out their business.
Yeah. So it isn't that I did the work. They did the work. They did more of the work themselves. They transitioned some of the people who were working for them and gave it to them in a gentle way rather than having to sort of lop them off in some sudden way or do a layoff or those sorts of things, to be able to just sort of transition in a beautiful way. As opposed, so as you exercise these muscles and say, hey, I can see this thing, then you're ready for things you can't see. It's beautiful. And the push-ups a day or a sit-up a day metaphor is fantastic for just sort of understanding. You have to actually, if you can't, it's very difficult for people to go from 100 to 20. Like that's just really hard. Like even if you think about that in your car, if you're driving down the highway at 100 miles an hour and you got to drop down to 20, it's hard. It actually, you can smoke your brakes and all kinds of fun things will happen depending on how fast you have to do it, right? I have another client who's actually in the process of creating this big expansion. And they're shifting the focus of their business from one area to another area. And they've taken a large loan for this business expansion that is in this place, which they have experience and they have expertise, and they're bringing certain people in to do that stuff. And what I've been able to do with them is sort of say, okay, that's fantastic. Let's do that. But let's keep all of that loan money for the expansion. Let's make sure that we're not spending that in these other places. Or maybe you have some small amount of leakage, but not super leakage from one area to the other. And let's continue to work in this core business that you've had for several years to make that be sustainable for you, and sort of separate it, even though there's still one business, separate it energetically. Use, essentially classes to sort of look at these things as being separate entities, even though there's still one entity. So that when you're ready to sort of peel this off into a separate entity, you've already done all the legwork financially to be able to see how that works.
Wow. It's remarkable. So many possibilities for small businesses, small, medium-sized businesses when they take on these philosophies. And I would love to end with any advice that you would give to bookkeepers who might either want to start to take on some of this knowledge and learn how to do this for their own business, or be able to be prepared to work with people like yourself that can do it for their clients.
Well, I'm going to say all consulting begins with questions. You actually have to know this current state to be able to help people get to the next state. And so my main piece of thought for people who are bookkeepers is ask the question, what is most important for you to know about your business that we might be able to get from these books? And 2, what are the big to medium-sized decisions that you're making over the next 6 months that we want to make sure you have the information to do? If you ask those 2 questions and then you say, okay, to do that, map to this is how I would set up the books, or this is how I would change the books that I'm already doing. I would add this piece of information, and for goodness sakes, tie expenses to revenue, whether that's through customers or classes or some other way. Tie expenses to revenue. Those are my 2 main things to say.
Remarkable. I absolutely love them. Noah, if our listener wanted to get in touch with you, learn more about you, what is the best way for them to do that?
Well, they can always send an email to Noah@knowyournumberswithnoah, or you can go to knowyournumberswithnoah.com, and there's information in there and ways to contact me, and that'd be fantastic. I'd love to talk to you. And, I'm always being asked who is a good bookkeeper I can talk to about this. So please let me know if you're those people and if you're interested in helping people do things this way.
Beautiful. I'm sure you're going to get some response for sure. And Noah, on behalf of our listeners, I want to thank you for generously coming and sharing your wisdom, your experiences with all of us.
Thank you, Michael.
And with that, we wrap another episode of the Successful Bookkeeper podcast. To learn more about today's wonderful guest and to get access to all sorts of valuable free business building resources, you can go to thesuccessfulbookkeeper.com. Until next time, goodbye.
You've been listening to The Successful Bookkeeper with Michael Palmer. For more information and to download the resources mentioned in this episode, please visit us at thesuccessfulbookkeeper.com. Thank you for listening.